The dog came in bleeding on a Tuesday night, and Claire Navarro was the only one who didn't look away. She had been halfway through her charting when the automatic doors blew open, and Sergeant Marcus Webb staggered through, his left arm wrapped around a German shepherd in tactical gear, both of them soaked through from the November rain. The dog, a big male, maybe 90 pounds, had a gash across his right foreleg that had soaked through what looked like a field dressing someone had thrown on in a hurry. He wasn't whimpering. That was the part that got Claire. He just looked up at her with those amber eyes, steady and patient, like he'd already decided she was worth trusting. She was off the nurse's station before she'd made any conscious decision to move. "How long has he been bleeding like this?" she asked, already crouching down, pulling on gloves from her scrub pocket. Sergeant Webb looked like he'd been awake for 30 hours. He probably had. 40 minutes? Maybe more? We were 20 minutes out from base when he went down. I didn't know where else. He stopped. His jaw tightened. "He saved my life tonight. He pushed me out of the way and took it instead. I'm not letting him die in a parking lot." Claire had her hands on the dressing before he finished the sentence. The wound was deep but clean. Whatever had done this, she didn't ask, had cut through muscle, but missed the artery by a margin that should have made Webb drop to his knees and thank God. She pressed her palm flat against the field dressing and looked up at the front desk, where Donna Ashby, the charge nurse on duty, was watching with the flat expression she used when she was about to become a problem. "I need an exam room," Claire said. "Room 4 is open." Donna walked over slowly. That was how she always delivered bad news. Slowly, so you knew she'd already decided and nothing you said was going to change it. "This is a human hospital, Navarro. I know what hospital it is. We don't treat animals. I know that too." Claire didn't move her hand from the dressing. "I'm treating a wound. The patient in this case has 4 legs. That's the only distinction. That is a legally significant distinction." Sergeant Webb stepped forward. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, and he had the particular stillness of someone trained to not let his body show what his mind was doing. "Ma'am, this animal is United States government property. He has a service number. He has a rank. He outranks me." He said that last part quietly, like it cost him something. "His name is Bruno, and I'm asking you to help him." Donna looked at Bruno. Bruno looked at Donna. Then Donna looked back at Claire with an expression that had moved past inconvenience into something closer to warning. "I'll call Dr. Harland," she said. "Call whoever you want," Claire said. "I'll be in room 4. She didn't wait for a response. She just stood up, adjusted her grip on Bruno's makeshift dressing, and nodded at Webb. He scooped the dog up with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it before, and they walked down the hall together while Donna stood at the desk with a phone in her hand and a look on her face like she was storing something up for later. Claire had been a nurse for 6 years. 3 of those years were at Mercy General in Shreveport, which had taught her that the gap between what the rulebook said and what a decent human being would do was often exactly the size of the person enforcing the rules. She had also learned that people like Donna Ashby weren't cruel, exactly. They were just more afraid of liability than they were moved by suffering. That was its own kind of cruelty, but it came in a gray suit and carried a clipboard, so most people never recognized it for what it was. She got Bruno onto the exam table with Webb's help. The dog held still in a way that broke her heart a little, trained to endure, trained to wait, trained to trust the people around him even when those people were strangers in a fluorescent-lit room that smelled like antiseptic. She worked quickly, cleaned the wound, assessed the depth, determined that sutures were what he needed, and that she was capable of placing them even if her license had been issued for a different species. The hands were the same. The need was the same. Webb stood against the wall, with his arms crossed over his chest, and his eyes on the dog the whole time, not saying anything, which Claire appreciated. People who filled silence when they were scared always made the job harder. She was halfway through the sutures when the door opened. She expected Dr. Harland, who was a tired man who mostly wanted to get home and would probably look the other way. What she got instead was Patricia Goss. Patricia Goss was the hospital administrator, which meant she was the person who had decided years ago that her actual job was to stand between the hospital's legal exposure and everything else. She was 53, wore her silver hair in a cut that meant business, and had the posture of someone who had never once sat down in a meeting when she could stand and look down at people instead. She stepped into the room, took in the scene, Claire, the dog, the suture kit, Webb in the corner, and her expression went through a very rapid sequence of calculations before landing on controlled fury. Navarro. I'll be done in about 4 minutes, Claire said, without looking up. You will stop what you're doing right now. I can't stop right now. I'm in the middle of a suture, and if I stop, I'll cause more damage than I prevent. Goss moved closer. Claire could see her shoes from her peripheral vision. Low heels, sensible, the shoes of someone who walked a lot of hospital floors. This is not a veterinary clinic. What you are doing constitutes unauthorized practice outside the scope of your license and creates a significant liability exposure for this institution. He'll be done in 4 minutes, Webb said from the corner. His voice was very calm. I'm respectfully asking you to let her finish. Goss turned to look at him. He looked back at her. It was the kind of standoff where both people are assessing each other's determination, and Webb's particular expression, flat, patient, certain, seemed to give her a moment of pause, but only a moment. Sergeant, I understand this animal is important to you. With respect, ma'am, he is not an animal to me. He is my partner. That is a meaningful distinction to you, and I understand that. However, 4 minutes, Claire said. That's all I'm asking. Goss pulled out her phone. Claire didn't know who she called. She placed her last 3 sutures, tied off, cleaned the area, applied a proper dressing. Bruno exhaled slowly when she finished, like he'd been holding something in and had just decided it was safe to let it go. Webb was across the room in 3 steps, and his hand went straight to the dog's head, this big rough hand just resting there between the ears, and neither of them moved for a second. That was the moment that got Claire later. Not the firing, not what came after. That moment. She stripped her gloves, washed her hands, and turned around to find Goss still in the doorway with her phone at her side and an expression that had finished calculating and reached a verdict. You need to come with me, Goss said. Claire dried her hands. I know. She told Webb she'd done everything she could, that Bruno needed a vet to follow up in the morning, but that the wound was properly closed and he wasn't in danger. Webb nodded once, a slow, formal nod, like he was acknowledging something that went beyond the medical update. Thank you, Nurse Navarro, he said, like a soldier. She followed Goss down the hallway and into the administrator's office, which was very clean and very quiet and smelled like the candle that sat unlit on the corner of the desk. Goss sat down. Claire stood. There was a script to this kind of conversation, and Goss ran through it efficiently. Unauthorized medical procedure, scope of practice violation, insurance implications, immediate termination effective tonight, security would escort her out. Claire didn't argue. She'd made her choice the moment she'd pressed her hand against that dressing. She understood that choices had consequences, and she didn't think that consequences were unjust just because they hurt. She thought about Bruno's eyes, steady and patient, worth trusting. I'll get my things, she said. She wasn't allowed to. That was the part that caught her off guard. Not that she was fired, but that they sent a security guard with her to the locker room and stood outside while she collected her bag, and then walked her past the nursing station and past the ER waiting room and out through the automatic doors into the November cold without her coat, which was still hanging on a hook inside. Her car keys were in her bag at least, and her phone, but she stood in the parking lot in her scrubs and felt the cold come through the thin fabric and realized she'd been so focused on not making a scene that she hadn't thought about the practical reality of a Louisiana November night without a jacket. She sat in her car for a few minutes, just sat, the engine running, the heat coming on slow, the radio off. 6 years of nursing, and she'd never once left a patient worse than she'd found them. She'd told families things that had broken their hearts. She'd worked doubles and triples, and once, during a flooding event, she'd stayed for 31 hours straight and driven home in water up to her wheel wells. She had never, not once, let someone suffer because helping them was inconvenient. She thought maybe she should feel more certain about what she'd done. The certainty came in flashes, but underneath it was something tireder and older and more honest. The knowledge that being right and being protected were 2 different things, and she was sitting in a parking lot in the cold because she'd confused them. She drove home. She didn't sleep much. The next morning, her phone started going off at 6:45. The first call was from a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail. The second was from her friend Keisha, who also worked at Mercy General, who said, "Claire, what is happening? Call me back." The third was from her mother, which meant something had reached Facebook. The fourth was the unknown number again. She called it back. "Miss Navarro?" A woman's voice. Professional, clipped, with the particular efficiency of someone who made a lot of calls. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Dana Solis. I'm with Naval Special Warfare Command, Public Affairs. Do you have a few minutes?" Claire sat up straighter on her couch, still in yesterday's clothes. "I have quite a few minutes. I'm currently unemployed." There was a brief pause. "I'm aware of that. That's actually why I'm calling." What had happened, Lieutenant Commander Solis explained, was that Sergeant Marcus Webb had made a post. Not a long one. He'd posted a photo, Bruno on the exam table, Claire's gloved hands at work, and he'd written about 15 sentences describing what had happened. He hadn't used Mercy General's name. He had used Navarro's. He'd used the phrase "she didn't look away," and apparently that had done something to people, because by midnight it had 40,000 shares, and by morning it had more than that. "We've been contacted by 3 local news stations and a national outlet," Solis said. "And, more relevantly, several members of the command have asked to be kept informed of the situation." "The situation," Claire repeated. "Your termination, and what led to it." Claire rubbed the back of her neck. "I appreciate Sergeant Webb's support, but I don't really know what. Mrs. Navarro, I'm going to be direct with you. Bruno is a decorated service animal. He has 2 commendations, and he's deployed 4 times. The men and women he has served with are not particularly pleased that a hospital fired the person who helped him last night." Solis's voice stayed professional, but something moved underneath it. "A number of them would like to express that displeasure in person." At Mercy General. "This morning, how many people are we talking about?" "I'd rather not give you a number until they've confirmed it with base command, Lieutenant Commander Solis." A pause. "Enough to fill a parking lot, possibly more." Claire put her free hand over her mouth for a second. Then she said, "Is that legal?" "Completely. They'll be in civilian attire, off-duty, exercising their right to peaceable assembly. The JAG office has already looked at it." Another pause. "I'm telling you in advance because we want to make sure you know this isn't something we're doing to pressure you into any particular response. This is something they're doing because it's what they want to do." It took Claire a moment to find words. "Will Bruno be okay?" Sergeant Webb took him to a veterinary clinic at 0600. The vet said whoever sutured him did clean work. Solis's voice was careful. "He's going to be fine." Claire exhaled. She drove to Mercy General at 9 in the morning and found 37 people standing in the parking lot in civilian clothes. Some of them were wearing caps with unit insignia. Several had their hands in their pockets and their eyes on the front entrance with the particular patient stillness of people who were very good at waiting. There was a man near the front who was perhaps 60, gray-haired, upright, wearing a plain jacket that somehow still managed to communicate authority in every thread. He introduced himself when Claire got out of her car, and she learned later that he was a rear admiral, retired, whose son had deployed twice with Sergeant Webb's unit. His name was Raymond Castillo, and he shook her hand and said, "We owe you a debt," she said. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what I should have done." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said, "you did. That's exactly why we're here." They went in together. 38 people through the front doors of Mercy General at 9:14 on a Wednesday morning, Claire in her regular clothes and 37 others arranged around her in a configuration that was not threatening and did not need to be. Patricia Goss appeared from her office with the look of someone who had already been briefed that something was happening, but had not quite prepared for the specific reality of it. Donna Ashby was at the nursing station, and she watched the whole thing come through the door with an expression Claire had never seen on her before and couldn't quite name. Rear Admiral Castillo, retired, civilian, technically without any authority over Goss or the hospital at all, introduced himself pleasantly and asked if there was somewhere they might sit down and discuss the events of the previous evening. His voice was the same voice he'd probably used in briefings for 30 years, calm, thorough, exact. Goss said yes. Of course, please follow her. The conversation lasted an hour and 40 minutes. Claire was not in the room for most of it. She sat in the waiting area with two of the others, a woman named Torres, who'd been a corpsman, and a man named Briggs, who hadn't offered his specialty, and whose hands Claire noticed were very still. Torres told her about the first time Bruno had gone out with the unit. She told the story with a lot of specific detail and not a lot of emotion, which was how Claire had noticed people told the stories that mattered most to them. When Goss came out, she came out alone. She found Claire in the waiting area and sat down across from her in a chair that was too small for the posture she was trying to maintain. She said, "There are some things I'd like to discuss with you." Claire said, "I'm listening." What had been decided, and the passive voice was Goss's, deployed carefully, was that the termination would be reviewed. That review would determine whether the decision had been made with full consideration of all relevant factors. In the meantime, if Claire were interested in returning to her position, that door was open pending the outcome of the review. There would also be, Goss added in a slightly different tone, a review of certain hospital policies regarding emergency situations involving working animals in government service. She did not apologize. Claire hadn't expected her to. What she said instead at the very end was, "You did very good work last night." She said it the way someone says something they've been told to say and has then discovered they might mean. With the sutures, the veterinary clinic confirmed it. The wound is healing cleanly. "Thank you," Claire said. She went back to work the following Monday. Donna Ashby handed her the assignment sheet without comment, then paused, then said, "I looked up his commendations. Bruno's. They're not classified." She said it like she was reporting a fact that happened to be relevant to an internal process. "He found an IED in Kandahar in 2019, saved 11 people." Claire nodded. 11, Donna said again, like she was still working through the arithmetic of it. On Friday, Sergeant Webb brought Bruno by. They came through the lobby, and Bruno was moving well, the bandage on his foreleg clean and professional, and he was wearing his vest with the patches on it, the ones that meant working dog and do not pet, though Webb unclipped something and gave Claire a nod that she interpreted correctly as permission. She crouched down, and Bruno put his big head against her shoulder, and she held it there for a moment, his warm weight against her collarbone, and she thought about how he'd looked at her that first night. Steady, patient, certain she was worth trusting. She was glad she'd been. Webb handed her something when she stood up. A coin, heavy, brass, with a seal on one side she didn't fully recognize and an inscription on the other that she read without saying out loud. He didn't explain the tradition, and he didn't need to. She closed her hand around it. "How's he doing?" she asked. "Good," Webb said. "The vet says another 10 days and he'll be cleared for light duty." He looked at Bruno. "He's already trying to go back to work. I keep having to tell him to take it easy. He doesn't listen. He never listens." Webb said it like it was the best thing about the dog in the world. Claire laughed. Real, surprised, the kind of laugh that comes out before you decide to let it. She put the coin in her scrub pocket and went back to her patients. She had a 12-hour shift ahead of her, 4 discharges to coordinate, a teenager in room 6 who needed his IV restarted and was afraid of needles, and a woman in room 2 who'd been waiting for test results since the morning and kept pressing her call button, not because she needed anything, but because she was scared and needed to hear a human voice come through the speaker and say, "I'm here." Claire pressed the button first, before the woman could call again. "I'm here," she said. "I'll be right with you." And she was.